when the 100th anniversary of the First World War was marked with a sea of poppies at the Tower of London. He was at the Queen's side, reflecting on the sacrifice military men like him had made. There was a sense of fun that appeared
off number 4.
Now, the latest ITV News, where you are.
Tonight, we remember Prince Philip's life in London. The palace announces the Duke of Edinburgh died this morning at the age of 99. Londoners share their memories of the royal who spent decades dedicating his life to service.
He was just so real, and he came across like he was just himself. So for me, it was just like, wow, like he's interesting.
We're here at Buckingham Palace this evening and across the capital as well.
Here in Windsor, where the Duke died, people have been arriving all afternoon to lay flowers.
And we're on board the Cutty Sark with tributes to the man known as the Baron of Greenwich.
And we look at one of the Duke's favourite hobbies, carriage riding. Good evening. He's the man who's been a constant by the Queen's side for almost 70 years. And tonight, the capital has been paying its own tributes to Prince Philip, who's died at the age of 99. Since Buckingham Palace made the announcement this morning, a steady stream of people have been arriving here behind me to lay flowers to remember a life long lived. Similarly at Windsor, where he passed and where he'll be laid to rest, the public has been arriving throughout the day to pay their respects and take a moment of quiet reflection. Tonight, we'll look back at his life here in London, the place he called home, the impact of his public service in the capital, and also remember one of his favourite pastimes. But first, Ron K. Phillips on the death of a prince.
Several children were among the mourners laying flowers outside Windsor Castle, where the Duke of Edinburgh spent his final days with the Queen by his side. Some also left notes of sympathy expressing their sorrow. Others came to pay their respects. At Buckingham Palace, the Prince's death was marked at midday when the Union flag was lowered to half-mast. And in keeping with tradition, royal household staff placed a framed plaque confirming the sad news on the front gates. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, led the tributes with a statement outside Downing Street.
It was with great sadness that a short time ago I received word from Buckingham Palace that His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, has passed away at the age of 99.
London landmarks like Post Office Tower were adorned with messages to the late Prince. The famous electronic billboard at Piccadilly Circus was used to display his picture as the London Mayor paid tribute on behalf of the capital.
I speak on behalf of all London when I say we're holding in our thoughts Her Majesty the Queen, who is grieving the loss of her husband.
Prince Philip was a man who took his role seriously, but he also had a sense of humour. And even though he was occasionally controversial, the public held him in great affection.
My mum used to talk about the funny things he used to say and about the Queen, and how he was so supportive to her. And, you know, it's a person that's been around for all of my life, and I'm really sad.
Seems to be was very nice man, and I think he was a symbol of United Kingdom.
Very sorry for the Queen. I have lost my husband, so I don't know exactly what she's feeling.
I thought he was an extraordinary man, full of maybe controversial elements, but generally very sympathetic, you know.
He's an icon, really, isn't he, like the Queen?
They've been together for so long, and it's just...
It's sad. It's really sad.
Buckingham Palace is now preparing for a royal ceremonial funeral, which will be held at Windsor Castle. Official mourning for the man the Queen called the brightest jewel in her crown is expected to continue for 30 days. Ron K. Phillips, ITV News.
For the last 70 years, the Duke of Edinburgh and Her Majesty the Queen have called London their home. While they have spent much of the last year living at Windsor Castle, Buckingham Palace is their official place of residence. It was here that the Duke held his final official engagement 4 years ago, before retiring from public duties at the age of 96. Our correspondent Simon Harris looks back now on his life of service in the capital as the longest-serving royal consort in British history.
For almost 7 decades, Prince Philip was a fixture at royal engagements in London. From his final public appearance, taking the salute at a march past by Royal Marines in front of Buckingham Palace, to his first 69 years earlier in the Royal Albert Hall and the annual boxing tournament of the Federation of London Boys Clubs.
The Duke of Edinburgh, patron of the Federation, watched all the battles with keen enjoyment.
Over the decades, the Federation of London Boys Clubs evolved into London Youth, and the Prince was still patron when the organisation celebrated its 130th anniversary with a party at Buckingham Palace.
When would I ever get a chance to speak to the Duke of Edinburgh? It was quite cool. And make it onto the Twitter page, like, that was my highlight as well.
Nima Robley and Victoria Azubike were both invited. Nima had already experienced the Prince's sense of humour at an earlier meeting.
When I met him in Cedars, I wasn't sure what he said, how did you get here? I told him that I came from Somalia, and he said to me, were you dragged here and were you screaming? And I said, oh, no, I got here. I was quite happy, yeah.
At the garden party, Victoria was one of the hosts as the Prince met other young Londoners.
For our generation, when we think of the royal people, the royal family, it's sometimes like they're so far off or just like so uptight almost. But he was just so real, and he came across like he was just himself. So for me, it was just like, wow, like he's interesting.
One part of London was to have a unique significance in the Prince's life, Greenwich. Alongside his best-known title, the Duke of Edinburgh was also Baron Greenwich. In 2012, he was instrumental in securing royal status for the borough.
I think Greenwich meant a great deal to him. I mean, of course, being Baron Greenwich, and the fact that he was a trustee at the National Maritime Museum, the fact that he was engaged very much with the Cutty Sark.
That project above all sealed the link between Baron Greenwich and the borough.
That famous and beautiful old tea clipper, Cutty Sark, has for long been in use for the training of cadets of the Thames Nautical Training College, HMS Worcester. Now, the 84-year-old clipper has been taken over by the Duke of Edinburgh as president of the Cutty Sark Preservation Society.
In the 1950s, an appeal for £250,000 was launched to save the ship. A dry dock was built next to the Thames. Prince Philip laid the foundation stone. After the Cutty Sark was devastated by fire during renovation work in 2007, the Prince was again on hand to oversee her return to glory. Prince Philip's naval career may have been cut short by his marriage to a reigning monarch, but he never lost his love of all things maritime.
When Prince Philip visited the Navy League's boat training centre at Ravensgate on the Thames, it was a big day for the Sea Cadets and Rangers.
His interest in encouraging young people to take up rewarding pastimes led to one of the most enduring legacies, the Duke of Edinburgh's Award. John Green, a 17-year-old from Silvertown, was the first person to receive a gold award at Buckingham Palace in 1957.
We had no money. My parents had 5 children. We had nothing. To go to the palace, I borrowed my brother's suit. we were just poor, very, very poor people. It was an amazing thing that happened to me, just an amazing thing. Soon after I got it, the people at work said, bring it in, bring your medal in tomorrow, bring your medal in. And I took it in. Oh, is that all you got? Yes, that's all I got.
Wildlife was another of Prince Philip's passions. He was president of the Zoological Society of London for 17 years and a frequent visitor to London Zoo. In the 1950s and 60s, the Prince was a fixture on London's glamorous social scene, one of the most sought-after VIP guests at society events. In later years, he adopted a lower profile, sometimes travelling around London in his own private taxi. There were times when he might have missed the climate of his childhood home on the Greek island of Corfu, like here at the age of 90, spending 4 hours on a cold and wet River Thames during the Queen's Diamond Jubilee pageant. But by then, Prince Philip had spent more than 60 years in the role that defined his life, the longest-serving royal consort in British history.
Well, Simon's joined us here at Buckingham Palace, and we've seen all afternoon a steady stream of people coming to pay their respects and to leave flowers, but we're actually being told not to do that, aren't we?
Yes, the official advice from the government for the safety and well-being of people is for members of the public not to turn up at any royal palaces and not to leave flowers. Obviously, crowds are not encouraged during the pandemic. The royal family has asked that people shouldn't leave flowers, that instead of flowers they should make a donation to charity. The coronavirus pandemic has, of course, changed all of the carefully prepared plans for what was meant to happen after the Duke of Edinburgh's death. Originally, there was to be a period of lying at rest just down the Mall at St James's Palace before a final journey by the Duke from St James's Palace past Buckingham Palace to Windsor Castle for the funeral. Well, that won't now happen. There will be no procession, no final journey, largely because they don't want any crowds. And there are other changes too, although tonight actually Westminster Abbey has got a bell tolling once every minute for 99 minutes for his 99 years. But other changes include no traditional books of condolence. Instead, there is an online book of condolence on the royal website for people to leave their messages. The coronavirus epidemic has also changed the election campaign, and the Duke's death has meant that the official period of mourning means that there will be no campaigning by any of the parties in the election for the Mayor of London, the London Assembly and some of the councils in the home counties, at least for the next few days. We don't know for how long, but definitely there will be no campaigning over the weekend.
OK, Simon, thanks very much. The Queen and Prince Philip have spent the majority of the coronavirus pandemic shielding in Windsor. They're even there at Christmas, the first time in 30 years that they didn't spend it over at Sandringham. It was from there that the Duke travelled to the King Edward VII Hospital back in February, where he was treated for an infection. Well, Chloe Keedy is outside the castle for us now. And Chloe, he'd not been back there long, had he?
No, less than 3 weeks, and by all accounts he was desperate to come back, to get home to Windsor. He spent a month in hospital, but other than that he has been here isolating with the Queen, as you say, for the past year. This is where he celebrated his 99th birthday last summer. This is where the couple celebrated their 73rd wedding anniversary in November, and this is where people have been coming all afternoon to pay their respects and to bring flowers. As Simon just said there, the palace and the police really have got this sort of difficult balancing act of allowing people to mourn whilst keeping things COVID secure. And they've actually been asking people that have arrived with flowers to take them down to the Cambridge Gate on the long walk. I spent some time there this afternoon and I asked people why they'd felt moved to come here today.
There for the Queen. He's always his service to the country. And he's always been there. He's always been part of my life.
He's special to the Queen.
He is very special to the Queen, isn't he?
Yeah, so that's why I really wanted to come.
He was like a grandfather to the nation, wasn't he? Lovable, full of duty, but a man and one that had compassion.
Yeah, so as with the flowers, you know, where does it go from here? I think the overriding concern will be to avoid crowds because of the pandemic. Plans, as Simon said, are in a bit of a state of flux, but it's expected that everything will take place behind these walls. It's assumed his burial will be in St George's Chapel, and that's where he will lie, not in state, but in rest. So no big procession, no crowds, but by all accounts, Prince Philip himself always said that he didn't want much fuss.
That's very true, Chloe. Let's talk now to the royal historian, Jane Ridley. Jane, thanks so much for talking to us this evening. Now, as we know, Prince Philip was the longest-serving consort of our country's longest-serving monarch. He really did make that role his own, didn't he?
Oh, he really did. I mean, that role he made it really important, and he made such a huge success of it. I mean, you know, you always see him on television walking 2 steps behind the Queen, and, you know, legally and constitutionally, the Queen is the boss. But the consort plays this vital part in you know, talking over things with the Queen, in sort of supporting her, in advising her, in sort of helping get out of difficult situations. And it's that partnership that it's been, I think, is the sort of most important thing that Prince Philip managed to achieve and to maintain over all those years.
Now, in terms of their relationship, there really was an enduring fascination, wasn't there?
between them. You mean between them?
I'm sorry, Jane. I can't quite hear. There's a lot going on here, Jane. No, the enduring fascination, I guess, from the public in terms of the longevity of their relationship, and just an endless fascination in the love that they had for each other and the way that they modernised the monarchy.
Yes. I mean, I think this very strong marriage that they had is such a huge asset. I mean, for any monarch, I think they get on much better. It's almost indispensable that they should have a strong marriage. And it was a very strong marriage. And it was, you know, Prince Philip had his role. He was in charge of things relating to the family. He managed the family estates. He looked after, you know, Windsor Castle or whatever it might be. And he also had this huge portfolio of charities and particular interest in wildlife and the environment. So that was his sort of area. And the Queen had her area, which was basically the constitutional role of being head of state. And Prince Philip was always terribly careful not to get into her, you know, not to sort of cross the line and start interfering at all. And I think that sort of ability that they both had to sort of focus on their individual areas of responsibility, but at the same time to have this very strong sort of double act that they had, this partnership, that really was the secret of their success.
In terms of their life here in London, we're of course standing right now outside of their official residence. I mean, London was quite a big part of their life, his life, and the life of the royal family.
Well, I mean, Buckingham Palace is the, you know, it's the office, and it's also the place where they spent an awful lot of most of their time. And so yes, London, and I think that the monarchy it's really important that the monarchy should be located in London. You know, this is the place where all the great processions and parades and ceremonial events take place. Though both the Queen and Prince Philip were great country livers and must have felt...
Of course, and then unfortunately it's those sort of great events that we're not able to see at the moment because of the pandemic. But Jane, thank you so much for talking us through that. We're going to go to the Royal Borough of Greenwich now, because it had a special place in the Duke's heart. He was also known as Baron Greenwich, patron of the National Maritime Museum, and he was also president of the Cutty Sark Trust. Rags Martell is on board the Cutty Sark for us with the Mayor of Greenwich. Rags.
Charlene, we all knew him as a prince, but he was very much a sailor first, and this ship might very well be his legacy to London. And I'm joined now by Councillor Linda Bird. What's your reaction to today's news?
Thank you. Today, here in Greenwich, we mourn the loss of Prince Philip, who was the Baron of Greenwich, but also was given the freedom of the Royal Borough in 2012. For his work principally in bringing the Cutty Sark back to life. We are indebted to the Prince for this.
How important is this ship to your borough?
The Cutty Sark is the Greenwich landmark for millions of people. And when the fire broke out in 2007, Prince Philip was a great support. He came as soon as he saw the fire. He also came back when it was restored. So for us, he gave us back our landmark.
How have people of Greenwich reacted? I've heard some people walking up here who said they were in tears at hearing the news. How much is the depth of the feeling?
The residents of Royal Greenwich have got huge empathy for the Queen, and they would like, I'm sure, to send their deepest condolences to Her Majesty. Theirs was a true partnership, a lifelong partnership, and she must now come to terms with the loss of her partner and her consort. And so many of us have suffered bereavement during this time. So we feel as though we can think about her and offer our heartfelt condolences. I'm sorry.
Have you had any idea how you will remember him? A statue, perhaps?
I have no inside knowledge about remembrance, but certainly this borough will now proceed in marking the tribute to this man.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Linda Budd. And now here is the story of Prince Philip and his beloved ship. This London landmark is his legacy. Would the Cutty Sark be here if it wasn't for Prince Philip?
Quite probably not. Without his vision and his passion, perhaps the ship may not be here today, but for him.
That famous and beautiful old tea clipper.
Ship conserved here and displayed in Greenwich, and so he was with it every step along the way.
Ceremonies on board the Worcester mark the handing over of the ship, which is to be kept as a lasting monument to the days of sail.
He had such strong links to the sea, and I think for him, the Cutty Sark is in many ways the last of those ships, and one of the most famous, if not the most famous, sailing ship in the world. And so I think for him, it encapsulated many of those values, and so he saw a great need and opportunity to preserve the ship for all time.
Despite the post-war austerity, Prince Philip helped raise enough money to build a permanent home for his ship.
The Duke of Edinburgh arrives by launch at Greenwich Pier. As patron of the Cutty Sark Preservation Society, he was to lay the foundation stone of a permanent berth for this famous old sailing ship.
It needed money and it needed vision, and of course it was just after the war. There was not a lot of money around, and money that was around was needed for many other things.
First, His Royal Highness operated the pile driver, which set the last pile into its key position. When the dock is completed, Cutty Sark will lie in it, a permanent centre of interest for all visitors.
This project was his passion, as was Greenwich, and so all those things came together, whereby the ship could be the realisation of many of those things coming together.
Even when the Cutty Sark was in trouble again, catching fire in 2007 during renovation work, Prince Philip was on site the next day to lend his support. And 5 years later, he was back on the deck of his beloved clipper to see it reopen to the public. How much will you miss him?
We'll miss him greatly because he'd been associated with museum from the very beginning. So he's been an ever constant in the life and history of this organisation.
The country has lost a prince, but this ship has lost its patron. Rags Martel, ITV News, Greenwich.
In the tribute from the Prime Minister this morning, he said, like the expert carriage driver that he was, the Duke of Edinburgh helped steer the royal family and the monarchy. Well, the Duke's love of carriage driving was only matched by his role in keeping the tradition of that sport alive, as Amy Lewis reports.
It is a gentleman's sport that was pioneered by a duke. Carriage driving was Prince Philip's favourite pastime in his later years. Speaking at the Royal Windsor Horse Show, where he was a regular competitor, he reflected on how he got involved.
I started driving because I'd been playing polo, and I decided that I would give up polo when I was 50. I happened to be 50. And I was looking around to see what next, you know. I don't know what there was available. And I suddenly thought, well, we've got horses and carriages and grooms. I said, well, why don't I have a go?
The Duke of Edinburgh finished second in this final phase after retiring with a bent axle in the marathon the previous day.
He wasn't satisfied with simply having a go. The Duke helped carriage driving become an international sport by developing the rules and was instrumental in getting the three-day event included in the Windsor show in the 70s. Those who raced against him, including Dick Lane, who is based near Guildford, say he never asked for special treatment.
He still was on the rules committee in this country, and also he would steward at events. He would come along and time keep an obstacle element. He was like one of the lads, really. He would like to. There was a big social side when you go away to these competitions, and he would stand and have a beer with anybody, with his fellow competitors, especially if they were away competing, representing the country. He would have liked to be one of the lads, really, and treated as such, you know.
In Britain, it's called combined driving.
and the teams of 4 horses, their drivers and their vehicles are minutely examined for turnout, skill and stamina over 3 quite gruelling days.
The Duke found that in this sport, just like in royal life, you were judged every time you put a step wrong.
They were really looking to see for the suppleness and the obedience of the horses and the, in a sense, the accuracy of the driving and the way they did really basic movements, but doing them accurately and exactly, which it sounds relatively easy, but in fact, when you try and do it, it drives you up the wall.
Yes, you've got to remember every move, of course.
Which I didn't.
On one occasion in Windsor, he lost control of the ponies and his patience.
You idiot!
Moments later, he was thrown from the carriage along with his grooms. He wasn't injured, but some of the valuable royal pieces weren't always so lucky.
I mean, all the carriages were antiques, and we had a thing called the Balmoral dog cart. It's still in the... It had to be rebuilt every year because it got smashed up regularly.
Mishaps aside, he won medals for Great Britain at World and European Championships. The sport will always be grateful to the man who helped shape it. Amy Lewis, ITV News.
Just like families all across the capital over the past year, the royal family are now grieving for an extraordinary man during extraordinary times. Here at Buckingham Palace, Londoners have been arriving throughout the day. But don't forget that we're being encouraged not to come here or Windsor Castle to lay flowers, just to make sure everyone stays safe. But the mere fact that people want to pay their respects to Prince Philip shows the impact he had and the man he was. Tonight, the Queen starts the difficult journey of grief, alongside adapting to a public service life on her own. She'll be without the man she once described as her strength and stay, who's been by her side throughout her 69-year reign. Their children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren mourn alongside her, but so too will the country and this city, each in our own way. We're back with the latest at 11 o'clock after an extended ITV News at 10. Coming up, Mary Nightingale with a special ITV Evening News programme.
Hello there. Very good evening to you. Across much of the capital through today, there was some spells of sunshine to greet us first thing this morning. Northerly airflow redevelops that we saw earlier in the week. Not as cold as earlier in the week, though, saying that. There will be some light outbreaks of rain at times too, and for most of us as well, where we do see clearer skies at night, there is the risk too we could see an overnight frost. We've got a little weather front with us that we've been seeing some outbreaks of rain across much of the country through today. That fizzles out tonight and into tomorrow. Then it's this little feature here, this area of low pressure. Now, there is some uncertainty about how far north this will track, and that could bring some light outbreaks of rain across central southern England, possibly for the likes of East Anglia and for the capital too as we go through Saturday, but there's still, like I said, some uncertainty even at this stage. So through this evening and overnight, we've got cloudier skies out there at the moment with that weather front. There's starting to be some light outbreaks of rain at times too, but for the majority of us overnight tonight, it turns a lot drier. There could be a few clearer skies for the likes of St Albans, and temperatures dropping into low single figures. So a rather cool start to our day on Saturday. Cloudy skies from the word go for tomorrow. There will be some light outbreaks of rain on and off too. The winds staying fairly light, and remember that feature, that's just giving a little bit more unstable air across southern counties of the UK. So this is where we're most likely to see some outbreaks of rain. Further north it could be drier, but there could be some brighter spells too, but still a cool feeling day. Temperatures struggling for the time of year, just 7-8 degrees, maybe 9 or 10 if we do catch the odd glimmer of sunshine. For Sunday, more sunshine from the word go. A very cold start today, a frosty one in fact. Sunny spells by the afternoon, most of us staying dry, but these are isolated showers for likes of East Anglia may just slip their way southwards. So still the risk of a few showers through Sunday, so chilly through the weekend, but turning drier, brighter and milder as we head into next week. Take care.
The nation mourns His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, who has died at the age of 99. Buckingham Palace made the announcement just after midday today, saying the Duke passed away peacefully at Windsor Castle. He was by the Queen's side during 73 years of marriage. Today, she expressed her deep sorrow at the loss of her beloved husband, while the Prime Minister led the nation's tributes.
He helped to steer the royal family and the monarchy so that it remains an institution indisputably vital to the balance and happiness of our national life.
He was like a grandfather to the nation, wasn't he? Lovable, full of duty, but a man and one that had compassion.
Prince Philip was the longest-serving royal consort in British history. He will be remembered for his unwavering support for the woman he loved and served.
He has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years.
Well, tonight we will look back at their life together and what it meant for the royal family and the country. Plus, his great passion for his pastimes and the legacy his charity work will leave behind.
I owe a lot to the Duke of Edinburgh, and I just want to say thank you for changing my life pretty much.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale from Buckingham Palace.
And good evening from Buckingham Palace, where the flags are at half-mast tonight in memory of the Duke of Edinburgh. The Queen, who's long called him her strength and stay, described her deep sorrow at his death. The couple had been married for 73 years, and the Duke was Britain's longest-serving royal consort. He passed away peacefully at Windsor Castle this morning, where he had only recently returned after a month-long stay in hospital. The Duke was just a few months shy of his 100th birthday. Tributes have been flooding in from around the world today, reflecting the Duke's huge influence and legacy. Well, here, the Prime Minister said Prince Philip had earned the affection of generations. The Archbishop of Canterbury said he'd always put the interests of others first. And in the first of our special reports this evening, here's our royal editor, Chris Shipp, on the warm tributes tonight to the Duke.
Moments after the official announcement, two courtiers walked across the forecourt of Buckingham Palace. And, as has been the custom for so many years, they posted a notice on the railings. A notice which announced the end of an era, the passing of this country's longest ever consort. The Union flag above the palace had already been lowered to half-mast. The announcement was a personal one on behalf of the Queen. It read, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss." At age 99, the Duke of Edinburgh had led a very long and very fulfilling life. He had only officially retired in 2017, when at this ceremony he bowed out of public duties for good. Prince Philip had just spent a long spell in hospital. When he was discharged last month after 4 weeks of treatment for his heart and an infection, it was the longest period he'd spent in hospital. But he was able to spend his final days with the Queen at Windsor Castle, the place where his own mother had been born in 1885.
Prince Philip earned the affection of generations here in the United Kingdom, across the Commonwealth, and around the world. He was the longest-serving consort in history, one of the last surviving people in this country to have served in the Second World War. We remember the Duke for all of this, and above all, for his steadfast support for Her Majesty the Queen. Not just as her consort, by her side every day of her reign, but as her husband, her strength and stay of more than 70 years. And it is to Her Majesty and her family that our nation's thoughts must turn today.
At Downing Street, as elsewhere in the country, official flags will now fly at half-mast until the morning after Prince Philip's funeral, the arrangements for which have been significantly revised because of the pandemic. And so too has the advice to the public. Many people had instinctively been moved to lay flowers, but in line with COVID restrictions, they've been urged not to, and also not to congregate at any of the royal residences.
Remembering what he's given to the country, to the world, it's wonderful.
It's a person that's been around for all of my life, and I'm really sad.
And because he has been part of national life for so long, for more than 7 decades, the flowers did keep coming, despite the official advice. This was Windsor Castle this afternoon.
My heart just breaks for the Queen and the family, because she lost her husband, and such a stability in the country, I think, the royal family. So, yeah, just deeply sad.
And in the capitals of the United Kingdom, the moment was being marked. At Piccadilly Circus in central London and in Edinburgh at the Palace of Holyrood House, the same announcement was posted outside.
He lived a life of public service and deep devotion to the Queen. He had a close association, of course, with Scotland. He went to school in Scotland. I know that he enjoyed all of the time he spent at Balmoral.
The Duke of Edinburgh will be sorely missed by the many Welsh organisations that he supported as patron or president over so many decades of service.
It is with deep sadness that I have learned of the death of His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh. It is a sadness that I know will be shared by countless others in Northern Ireland and right across the world.
From now until the day of the funeral, the Duke of Edinburgh's body will lie in rest at Windsor Castle. He never wanted a state funeral, despite the duty he'd given to his country and to the Queen. She now has the difficult task of signing off the amended funeral plans, which will have to take place behind the castle walls without the public in attendance. Windsor was where the couple spent their 73rd and final wedding anniversary last year. From their marriage at Westminster Abbey through the many years of her reign, the Duke of Edinburgh has been at the Queen's side through the happy times and the challenging ones. He's been her advisor, her confidant, her debater, her rock, her husband. She will now be a widowed monarch. She will do the job alone. At the place where they were married, Westminster Abbey, the tenor bell started to toll at 6 o'clock this evening. It will toll every minute for 99 minutes, one for every year of the Duke of Edinburgh's life.
Flowers have been left outside Windsor Castle, where the Duke passed away this morning. And our correspondent Dan Rivers is there. Dan, the Queen and other senior members of the royal family are in mourning there tonight.
That's right, and the flowers continue to arrive this evening, both at the Henry VIII gate behind me and on the other side of the castle at the Cambridge gate at the end of the long walk, laid by people of many different ages, of different backgrounds, nationalities and faiths, all wanting to come and mark this day and mark their thoughts for the Queen and for the Duke. This afternoon, the Palace did put out an advisory asking people not to bring flowers, asking instead that perhaps people would consider making a donation to charity and reminding people that there is an online book of condolence. But a lot of the people we spoke to felt conflicted. They knew that today, was difficult, that there was a balancing act between being socially distanced and wanting to mark the day. But many felt strongly that they did need to come here and pay their respects. And many of those people were from Windsor itself, a town, of course, closely associated with the Duke playing such a role in the restoration of the castle after the devastating fire in 1992. He was appointed chairman of the Restoration Committee. It was in that castle that he passed away, and it is fitting perhaps that he will be laid to rest inside that castle.
Dan Rivers outside Windsor Castle, thank you. Prince Philip's life was long, eventful and hugely influential. He had a glittering naval career and saw active service during the Second World War. But he had to give that up in 1952 when his wife, then Princess Elizabeth, became Queen. He remained loyally at her side to the very end. Our correspondent John Ray looks back at a remarkable life.
He was born Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark on the island of Corfu. His mother was Princess Alice of Battenberg, which made Philip a great-great-grandchild of Queen Victoria, just like his future wife. But when he was just 18 months old, Philip and his family fled Greece after a coup. He was to find a new home and a future through the Royal Navy.
His Majesty walking down the ranks of the cadets and
At the Naval College in Dartmouth, an encounter that changed his life. At the back here, in the centre of the screen, is 18-year-old Prince Philip. He'd been asked to entertain the King's daughters during a royal visit. Elizabeth, at the time, was just 13. Afterwards, they played croquet. It was clear she had taken a shine to the tall and handsome cadet. War would interrupt any romance that followed. He was mentioned in dispatches. They exchanged letters.
It's easy to see the radiant happiness of the princess.
And the coming of peace brought the rekindling of love. King George granted permission for the couple to marry. He renounced his Greek titles and was made Duke of Edinburgh.
Now the Duke of Edinburgh takes a fatherly hand, his technique being no better and no worse than most fathers.
But life was to change again. His naval career abandoned on the death of his father-in-law and the accession to the throne of his wife.
I, Philip, will become your liege man of life and limb, and of earthly worship. In faith and truth I will bear unto you, to live and die, against all manner of folk, so help me God.
Rising, he kisses the Queen's cheek.
As ever with Philip, when duty called, he answered.
The Duke plays it back.
When he wasn't at his wife's side, he channeled his passion for sport into polo. And at the age of 50, turned his attention to carriage driving, for all its challenges and occasional dangers. The Duke took charge of the family side of what even he referred to as the firm. Never more tested than in the collapse of the marriage of his oldest son. The Duke was supportive of Princess Diana. Like her, he was once the royal outsider too. On her death, amid public anguish and anger, he shepherded his grandsons through their immense trauma, and in doing so, helped guide the institution of monarchy past its greatest challenge in modern times. And later that year, when the Queen and Duke celebrated their golden wedding anniversary, she paid him a rare public tribute.
He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years.
Royal milestones came and went. The Duke was slow to slow down, reluctant to retire, which he eventually did, with a characteristic joke.
I'm sorry to hear you standing down. I can't stand up much.
To the end, this was a partnership. To his wife, to the monarchy, Philip has fulfilled his promise. John Ray, ITV News.
And our royal editor Chris Shipp is here. Chris, very sad pictures looking at them together. The Duke had huge influence, didn't he, in this country, throughout the Commonwealth. But all of this is happening at a very difficult time of pandemic.
Yeah, you're right. Let me just take some of those issues. Look, nothing changes constitutionally. The Queen remains the monarch. It's just that she now does so without the consort that's been at her side since 1952. As for his dukedom, the Duke of Edinburgh, that actually officially passes to his eldest son, Prince Charles, but he won't use it. It'll be sort of reassumed and then given out when Prince Charles accedes to the throne. And it is Prince Edward, Prince Philip's youngest son, who will eventually become the new new Duke of Edinburgh. But of course, all this is being done at a time when the pandemic has affected every aspect of national life, and so too the funeral plans for the Duke of Edinburgh himself. There were plans that had been in place for a long time that involved, this area where we're standing now, but everything is now going to happen behind the walls of the castle. We understand that he will lie in rest. He doesn't get a state funeral. He will lie in rest until the day of the funeral. But that's, the job of the Queen right now, a very difficult job, is to sign off on those plans.
All of that is the official side of things, but of course the heart of this is a marriage, a very old lady, now widowed, and a very sad day for the family.
Yeah, we've had a sort of hint of that, I think, in recent years, about how she's managed to do her job since his official retirement. But don't forget, behind closed doors, she still had him there. She still had the man that's been by her side all these years. The difference now, of course, for the Queen is that she's going to have to be doing it on her own. And that would be, I think, the most significant change, a personal grief for her. And I think for the nation, a moment to stand back and reflect on a man who's been part of our national life, for 7 decades.
Chris, thank you very much indeed. Well, people right across the UK have been paying their respects to the Duke of Edinburgh today. Bells rang out at cathedrals and a silent tribute was held at Aintree Racecourse ahead of the Grand National Weekend. And the thoughts of many were with the Queen, as Rachel Younger reports.
His life spanned generations, but it was the youngest who came to Windsor's gates first, one offering a prayer to a prince who has simply always been there.
I think it's almost, you see it coming, but you never really are prepared for it, so you just feel a bit almost speechless in a way.
At the Minster in York, the bells tolled 99 times, one for each year of the Duke's life. And somehow, despite his age, it still felt too sudden.
It was a shock, because I thought it was really on the mend. But, very, very sad. Very, very sad, yes.
As at all the royal residences, at Sandringham, the pandemic meant the public were asked to stay away. But they came regardless. Moments like this reminding us how we measure out our own lives by the royals.
Obviously, when Princess Diana passed away, my mum brought me down. Then I did exactly the same as my daughter's done. So, and I was only about, 5, 6?
The flags at half-mast in Birmingham, the city's thoughts with those left behind.
I think it's a big shock for the family, but yeah, I just hope they're all okay.
All eyes will be on the Queen to see how she's reacting and how her health holds up, because she's also quite old.
And in Scotland, they mourn not only the Duke, but also the lack of ceremony.
It's so sad, and especially during this pandemic, because the restrictions mean people can't pay their respects properly.
I know he wasn't well, but still a sad day. And when he was an army man, and he was obviously very active.
I think he was quite a character.
Yeah.
He didn't always say the right things, which people thought, but no, I thought he did well. I thought he was all right.
And that understatement would rather have suited a man they mourned with 2 minutes silence at Aintree. After a year defined by uncertainty, his steadfastness will be even more deeply missed. Rachel Younger, ITV News.
Prince Philip's old school also paid tribute today. Gordonstoun in Scotland was credited with helping to shape his life. Gave him the love of fitness and the outdoors and his famous steely determination. Our Scotland correspondent Peter Smith is outside the school in Moray. Peter.
It was in September of 1934 that the young Prince Philip arrived, just one of 27 pupils at Gordonstoun at that time, and he was a 13-year-old boy who'd lived a nomadic life, and he credits this place with making him the alpha male we all came to know, specifically under the tutelage of the school's founder and principal during the Duke's time here, Kurt Hahn. He had him, the young Duke, running around the hills of Moray with cold baths. There was even constructing some of the paths that the pupils now work on today, very much setting the foundations, and that's why the pupils were paying their own homage to the Duke on the day of his passing. There was a lone piper, a pupil from the school, playing on the school grounds, and 2 of the school pupils lowered the school flag to half-mast. It was here that the young Prince Philip also perfected his sailing. That was part of the education here, and when he left He joined the Royal Navy and he dedicated his life to serving his country and then serving his Queen. But also he kept in touch with the school, and Kurt Hahn encouraged him in 1956 to give his name to the Duke of Edinburgh Award scheme. And after more than 3 million people have gone through that scheme, we can see the legacy of the Duke of Edinburgh and his time here from Moray. And he also has a bursary here, making sure that the pupils are following in his footsteps in that spirit of service.
Peter Smith outside Gordonstoun School. Thank you. Well, the Cabinet met in Downing Street this afternoon to pay tribute, and MPs are being recalled on Monday to pay their own respects. There's also been an agreement between the Conservative and Labour parties to suspend election campaigning. And our political correspondent Libby Wiener is in Downing Street tonight. So, Libby, politics on pause then?
Yes, Mary, it's not a day for politics, but it is a day for leadership. And it's hard to think of a figure who could have united not just leaders around this country, but around the world in the way that Prince Philip has done today. Among those paying tribute, Joe Biden, the President of the United States, Vladimir Putin, the President of Russia, as well as the President of France, President Macron. Now, all of them have focused on his contribution to public life in this country, particularly his role, his wartime service in the Second World War, which did so much to shape the modern world, as well as what he gave to our children in terms of the Duke of Edinburgh Award. Now, here in the last hour or so, members of the Cabinet have been meeting virtually and paying their respects to Prince Philip. MPs will get the chance to do likewise on Monday at a special session of Parliament when Parliament is being recalled. Now, the government will update people on the pandemic, but in a more low-key way than we have got used to recently. We understand also that the Prime Minister is planning to forego that much longed-for pint in a pub garden that he said he wanted to have this Monday.
Libby Wiener in Downing Street, thank you. Well, Prince Philip led a famously active life and was keen for others to experience and enjoy the great outdoors. He created, of course, the Duke of Edinburgh's awards scheme, which is still actively followed around the world today. And his love of nature saw him become an early advocate for conservation, which he passed on to his eldest son and grandsons. Here's Rebecca Barry on the Duke's lasting legacy.
For 18-year-old Mercedes from East London, who's partially sighted, taking part in the Duke of Edinburgh's award has been life-changing and made lockdown more bearable. She's taken up running as she strives for her silver award.
I owe a lot to the Duke of Edinburgh, and I just want to say thank you for changing my life pretty much. And I'm going to help you carry on your legacy by encouraging everybody I meet to take part in Duke of Edinburgh.
Before the pandemic, teenagers could venture out on expeditions, gaining valuable skills for their life journeys.
Keep going.
The scheme not just about camping and cooking, but building confidence.
It's warmed up, yeah.
The main purpose of the scheme is to help boys to find activities which will give them pleasure and satisfaction.
The Duke launched the scheme in 1956. Since then, it's expanded to more than 140 nations and more than 4 million young people have received awards.
People who are living in deprived areas who don't have opportunities, you have to, in a sense, provide that challenge.
In all, the Duke was patron or president of more than 800 organisations. Nice. His support helped fund cycling lessons for children, a kayaking club, even flying scholarships for teenagers.
The photographer is Prince Philip, wildlife enthusiast of international repute.
He was also, perhaps less famously, but no less passionately, a conservationist. Here on safari in Kenya in 1971.
All of these animals and birds are within measurable distance of being exterminated unless something happens.
In his determination to draw attention to man's impact on the world, he was ahead of his time. And he used his status to raise awareness, becoming president of the World Wildlife Fund.
He recognised the sheer scale of destruction that we have been wreaking on our planet, and he importantly wanted to protect it for future generations. The fact that it's up the agenda today is part of his legacy.
Sir David Attenborough first met the Duke in the 1940s when they were in the Royal Navy. Here they are together in 2019. The Duke's legacy, he says, the evolution and survival of the royal family.
Royalty in an indefinable way has modernised itself, and in that evolutionary process, the Duke of Edinburgh played a very, very important part.
And so his legacy lives on in all those still being inspired by his passions. Rebecca Barry, ITV News.
Well, Chris, the Duke famously didn't want a big fuss after his passing. What actually happens now over the next few days?
What happens now is that the body will lie in rest now at Windsor Castle. But from tomorrow, those sort of ceremonial procedures kick in, and there will be gun salutes to mark the death of Prince Philip in places like Belfast, Cardiff, London, Edinburgh, Gibraltar, even on some ships at sea. And that's quite fitting for a man who loved the Royal Navy, who served in the Royal Navy in the Second World War, and many people thought could go to the very top of the Royal Navy were it not for him having to give up that career effectively to be the consort to the Queen, and as we now know, the longest serving consort to the Queen. That is what will happen, and meanwhile the Queen will continue to sign off those funeral plans. They're likely to be next week sometime. We don't of course yet know. Difficult of course for her, but doing it at a time of a pandemic when people have been asked not to lay flowers and to make charitable contributions instead.
So it puts the Duke, if you can, into historical perspective.
Well, you could focus on the support he gave the Queen, you could focus on the Duke of Edinburgh Award, but I think historians of the future will look back on the second Elizabethan era, and in the same way that now we talk about Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, I think in the future we'll look back on this reign of Elizabeth II and we will talk about Elizabeth and Philip.
Okay, Chris Shipp, Royal Editor, thank you very much indeed. And that brings to a close our special programme remembering the really extraordinary life of Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. He passed away peacefully, we're told, this morning at Windsor Castle, just a few months short of his 100th birthday. The Queen described her deep sorrow at the loss of her beloved husband of more than 70 years. They met and they fell in love before many of us were even born. At the time, the young prince was seen as a rather unlikely match for the future Queen. But their love endured, and he went on to become Britain's longest-serving royal consort. He created his very own role, and he devoted himself to Queen and country. She called him, as we've heard, her strength and stay. And today, the nation joined the Queen in remembering Prince Philip's remarkable life and his selfless sacrifice and service. From all of us here, good evening.
Hello there. So the weather story for this weekend is it's colder than what it has been in recent days. By day, those temperatures will be below average for the time of year. There'll also be some frosty nights too. There will be some decent sunshine on offer, but a fair few showers around, and if you catch one of those, it could be heavy and wintry in places. So let's take a look at the bigger picture, where you can see here we've had this cold front sinking its way southwards throughout today. It's brought some cloud and patchy rain into places, and then behind that, things turning much cooler for many across the UK. You'll notice it's a mix of sunshine and showers as we go through this weekend, and with the winds coming in from a northerly direction once again, temperatures, as I say, disappointing for the time of year. Now, in the meantime, for the rest of this evening and tonight, we've still got a lot of cloud across central areas, East Anglia and the south, with some patchy rain in places. Further north, well, some wintry showers still to come across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but elsewhere in between, a mostly dry picture with clear skies. But of course, that's going to allow those temperatures to tumble. So there will be a frost forming for many, and then by the end of the night, a few pockets of mist and fog forming too. So Saturday morning starts off rather cloudy with some light and mostly patchy rain across southern areas. Then we'll see some fairly hefty showers developing for parts of central areas as we go through the afternoon. These could be wintry in places. And it's a case of sunshine and wintry showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland. In between though, although there will be one or two showers around at times which could be wintry, there will be some decent sunshine, especially across parts of Wales and the southwest. But you'll notice there those temperatures on the cool side ranging between 5 5 and 9 degrees, and it's a similar setup on Sunday. So it's sunny spells, scattered showers. These could be wintry in places, and once again our temperatures are below average for the time of year.
The Duke of Edinburgh today. We now bring you a special live programme with Julie Etchingham and Phillip Schofield. Prince Philip, fondly remembered.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this special programme on ITV, a tribute to His Royal Highness Prince Philip.
Tonight, we'll look back at the Duke of Edinburgh's life from his childhood to becoming a senior member of the British royal family.
We'll reflect on his vital role as the Queen's strength and stay through more than 70 years of marriage.
We'll look at the extraordinary impact he's had on this country through the Duke of Edinburgh Awards and more than 800 other charities.
And we'll be joined by people who knew Prince Philip well.
And throughout the programme, we'd like to hear from you, your pictures, your stories, your reflections of the Duke. That's a little bit later. First, though, here's what's coming up.
Don't understand horses. I mean, why they do this for us is they're absolute nuts.
Yes.
And he hated, oddly enough, he hated formality. He found formality suffocating. And he always did his best to try and break down the formality.
He resolved to make the monarchy fit for a new modern age, more efficient, more human, more approachable.
He gets a lot of flack for what he says off the cuff, which he does. But it's all with good intent, because the Queen's very busy doing what she's doing in the middle of a crowd. And he's, I think, always been trying to help her by engaging.